So why are flood defences apparently ineffective, and should we be looking more at prevention than cure? Let's speak to James Woodhousen, Professor of Forecasting and Innovation at London South Bank University. Good evening, Professor. Thanks very much for joining us. So you heard the Environment Agency guy there saying this was a 200-year high where he was. So whatever we did, it's possible that there would have still have been flooding.
I think that's a gospel of despair, if you don't mind, Mark. I think, I know the Environment Agency's London office is closed now at 5 o'clock, and what many households and many small and medium enterprises will call ruination at the hands of floods and failure to prepare for them. I'm glad to see that on the Environment Agency's website, the words ongoing significant river flooding impacts continue through this week. That's reassuring. They have confined their efforts to measuring these unprecedented water levels in Herefordshire, in South Wales, in Yorkshire, in Worcestershire, and so on, monitoring, telling you what you should do if you are flooded, and protecting a grand total, I just heard from Dave Throop, of 1,500 homes near him. It's all very creditable, and I'm sure he's working very hard, but the fact is that successive governments, beginning with John Prescott under Labour and then going through the Conservatives and the Lib Dems, have completely and absolutely failed to prepare any modern flood defences in this country technologically superior to sandbags. In 2020, Mark, we're dealing with a sandbag economy, and that much maligned material, plastics, which we're now finding in little bones and stones on seafronts and by the seaside, plastics could actually make proper flood defences, even if they're 3D printed in emergencies, somewhat superior to sandbags. We've got to do better.
What did he mean? Sorry to interrupt you, but what did he mean then when he said at the end there, look, we can't build our way out of trouble with hard defences?
Well, this is great, isn't it? We can't build our way out of anything, is the doctrine of our environmental friends and the Environment Agency. It is a gospel of despair. How is it possible that civilization has continued the way that it has, with all its defects, in the face of the natural elements, unless we've built our way out of problems? We've got to be able to do that. We've been able to do it in the past. Should be a breeze to do it in the future, if we're not so parsimonious and so backward-looking and so naturalistic as always to blame ourselves for creating climate change and putting the responsibility on individual households rather than the people we pay to sort these things out, the government. They've done too little, too late.
But what about his point about, you know, we need a sort of whole river? I've just dropped my pen in the middle of that. What does he mean about this whole river strategy? Are they concentrating more, do you think, on protecting flora and fauna rather than, you know, houses and businesses and farmland, maybe?
Well, I think that's a very proper criticism. Now, you know, the fact is that the doctrine that 4 legs are good, and including insects, or 6 legs, and 2 legs, namely us, are bad, is shared beyond Extinction Rebellion. We're all to blame for this, is what the government would like us to believe, instead of blaming their failure to think 21st century, to take infrastructure seriously, to raise the levels of houses, to build on floodplains if necessary, to go dredging if that's the whole solution. I don't believe it is. To use hydrological modelling to predict what your Environment Agency interviewee said it couldn't be predicted, which is large floods. We ought to be able to do that with satellite data and everything else in the 21st century. But no, it's just too much for us in Britain.
You know, I was speaking to a professor of infectious diseases, bear with me on this, the other day, and he said, look, we go through these emergencies every so often, and we deal with those emergencies, and the emergencies come and go, but because they come and go, we never really have a coherent strategy for dealing with infectious diseases. Now, is there a similar thing here where there's no real coherent strategy for flood prevention and coastal defences because people kind of forget about it once the immediate emergency has gone?
Well, it'd be nice to think that, because then we'd be human, but I'm afraid the policies of successive governments are all to blame, is of zero interest in coastal communities in particular and flood defences. They've tried to save money, they've tried to blame you and me for our contribution to climate change, and instead of adapting to climate change, they place all the emphasis on mitigating it through our personal behaviour, through the pressure we put on corporations and so on. They are reduced to monitoring and saying there's not much we can do. And if Boris Johnson wants to take seriously levelling up, then it needs a whole lot more money in a whole lot more places that are vulnerable to flooding. We know where they are. It's not rocket science. And he will have to take very seriously the fact that homes are being ruined. It is not just a question of dredging and of this or that local peculiarity. Thousands upon thousands of homes are being ruined, many of them for the second, third or fourth time. It is a scandal, and somebody has to speak out about this.
Yeah, and just finally, 30 seconds left. Is there a sense in which climate change is almost becoming an excuse to divert attention from the lack of action?
Well, I think that's absolutely right, Mark, and I'm delighted to hear you say it. You know, if you say this, you'll immediately be accused of denying climate change. I don't do that. I say that governments have a responsibility to protect democracies and protect their citizens from the natural elements, with or without climate change. They failed to do that. They can't go on failing for the next 20 years.
Yeah, no, my point was that the battle is full on to limit carbon emissions. So this battle with climate change is leaving aside, basic flood defences. Is that a point?
Well, yes, it is a diversion of intellectual effort, and it places, as I say, the responsibility on individuals. Or the new trendy thing is to talk about systemic change, which means building more wind power or so on to deal with carbon emissions. Meanwhile, the problems of the present, right now, for thousands of families, are just passed over. Everybody abdicates responsibility, and it's all put down to the climate and the weather and our personal behaviour. That won't do. That is irresponsible and an evasion of the responsibilities of government.
Yeah, OK. James Woodhousen, appreciate your time. Thank you.